It takes two people to start a movement. The lone outsider and the first follower. But you've got to be vulnerable to be that first or second person.
Mm.
And in order to effect change, that requires you to be willing to put your head above the parapet, or to put a cycling metaphor on it, go in the brake and and push yourself really hard. Risk a puncture, risk mechanical, like these things, and that it requires that that vulnerability and being open to that.
Welcome to Statements of Intent. In this 20-minute episode, we're addressing how e-commerce has lost sight of the people at its very heart. You, the customer. It's a chat that's optimistic, it's casual, it's probably slightly ranty in places, but that's okay. But it's a place where I talk to senior e-commerce marketers and share their statement of how they're looking to change the status quo of e-commerce, adding more care, being more considerate to those very people that they're selling to, the customer. I'm your host, David Mannheim, the founder of Made with Intent, and we're going to jump right into it. Have fun. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Statements of Intent, I think it's weekly or bi-weekly podcast, maybe monthly. Lib will tell me off for that, where we talk about all things e-commerce, specifically going against the status quo of e-commerce. I can think of no better person to speak to than Mr. Cynical himself. Mr. Nik Fletcher. How you doing, Nick? I'm so sorry
very well.
to call you cynical.
It's all right. It's all right. I've been called worse at times, so it's all good.
Well, Nick, you're head of digital experience at Rapha. You've been there for 7 or 8 years now.
Yeah, I'll be 8 years at the end of next month, so quite a while.
Congratulations. How are you feeling?
Yeah, it's good. It's been it's always a fun ride. Sorry, that's probably not going to be the last of the cycling puns today. But yeah, it's I'm very fortunate to work doing things that I've done my whole career in the digital space, and also to combine that with a passion. It's when you've got that, it makes it so much easier when you've got those harder battles and tougher hills to climb.
Well, I can another pun. I can imagine that you are just so much more involved in your work when you actually genuinely care about it. I suppose you're both a user and a practitioner.
I think there's also sometimes a bit of a danger that you always have a customer and shopper bias, that it's you, right? And as a brand, we've grown over the years. It's a much more, I guess, inclusive approach. We've got some incredible products for a much broader range of cyclists, and we talk about the idea of living life by bike, and that's a really good way to sort of step back from how I might want to live life by bike, and how we can use that passion to give people their experience of life by bike on their terms, but enabled by what we do in the products that we make for them.
Lovely. Do you feel as though by having such a passion as a user and both as a practitioner, that you almost hold yourself, or indeed your brand, or indeed your work, to a really high standard? I wonder, is that a very subconscious, deep, therapeutic question for a podcast?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's it's part of the moral fiber, perhaps, when you've got we close the office 3 times a year to go riding. We don't do it in the winter, but also all 3 other seasons we'll have at least one office ride a quarter. And, that, it feels like a part of the, I joke sometimes that we bleed high-vis pink, which is one of our brand colors. And that's part of the fuel that helps us to think about it and really push ourselves really hard.
Yeah, that's really, really nice. I like that. Well, when we're talking about e-commerce and putting ourselves to a high standard, your statement of intent today is progress over perfection, which I think is a lovely line in that it's alliterative. But could you maybe elaborate on it? What does that mean?
Sure.
To you?
I think sometimes it can appear to be that we're only interested in the short term. And that's so to go to the worst interpretation of that, it could be that you're only worrying about the short term. But I think it's about that. I think purpose comes to help anchor that, is that we know that the needs of our visitors, shoppers, customers, the term we use for them, that's going to evolve faster than we can respond necessarily. So to say what is the perfect thing or the perfect piece, it's only a snapshot in time. And so sometimes it has to be this thing over the horizon that you're riding towards. And it's about continually making that progress. You know, the Tour de France or the Giro d'Italia or the Vuelta, it's a 21-day stage race. And you can't always win it on one day, but you can almost certainly lose a 21-day Grand Cycling Tour. And so you've got to have that tenacity to keep going and to think, we're just going to keep going, because in some ways, maybe it's a compound interest mindset as opposed to a sort of pops and drops kind of mindset. But, you know, if if we think around long-term customer value as well, which so CRM sits as part of my world, there's that nurturing, there's that nudging, that, you know, exhilarating, you know, finding the right moments, knowing that it's for the slightly longer term. You have to keep, you know, people hold you to that bar as a customer, and you have to make sure that you're moving continuously, and that, yes, nothing will be, you know, there will be some times where you have to execute with perfection. To be clear, that's not saying there's no perfection. It's just that find that level of making that change and keeping that change moving and being able to respond. That's perhaps more important than any particular output. And I think that's the bit that I'd probably summarize. It's like that real outcome mindset, knowing the direction of travel and making sure you're still true to it, but not letting yourself get held up along the way on that journey. Your legs have to keep spinning to ride the bike at the end of the day.
Number 3, is it?
That's number 4, actually.
Is it, instead of being over perfection, is it more of a balance between the two? So is it progress and perfection, or progress opposed to perfection?
Yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I definitely don't think so. It's like progress, knowing that vision of where you want to be and holding that true. It's about keeping that just as, keep staying true to that, and making the progress is just as important as, they're not mutually exclusive for sure.
And when you talk about compound interesting, obviously my head immediately goes, as a Manchester United fan, goes to Sir David Brailsford, the old 1%. I'm aware he did quite a few things for cycling, but for me now it's just myopically focused on Ineos and Manchester United. And when you look at compound interesting, it feels as though you need some kind of measurement protocol to understand that you're going in the right direction. Because perfection has usually a key metric, a standardized, homogenized, global metric to
maybe even a lagging indicator as well. That's the other thing as well, is that you it's a bit like, I'm going to say, conversion rate is super important, but you know, if the goal of let's say we've got a jersey on our website, the goal is to attract people to know about that jersey, step one. Then do they add it to basket? And you've got those leading indicators. And so to your point, it's like, are we moving the leading indicators while still staying true to that conversion rate? Does it, because at the end of the day, I think we've spoken about this before. It's a bit of a fixed system. You apply pressure somewhere, so you drive a load of traffic to a product page. You might see a drop in add to bag if you've not done something right. Like there's so many variables. You just got to keep tweaking and responding and kind of like evolving your mindset and your approach and things like that. And that's why I think the compound interest piece just really helps you thinking like, okay, what did we learn? And then you can sort of bank the learning, stack that up. Does it still hold true? Keep moving, and you start to make progress towards, I'm going to say, a success metric of some sorts. Well, that'll nearly always be conversion rate and revenue. At the end of the day, we are businesses, but
of course, you
there's that leading indicator, and figuring out the right sort of, okay, why are we really successful? Is it essentially people who viewed that product who added to bag to get into the real nitty gritty? Is that our truest sort of, we managed, we hit that one out of the park, or in this case we didn't? And it requires I think that double-edged sword of like long and lagging indicators and short and immediate indicators in combination to really help you drive some progress.
In combination, you're right. The balance between the two. And we've obviously spoken loads of times before, but you spoke to me last time about an acronym that Rapha uses to like attract, convert and retain customers. What was that acronym again?
So I think this stems down to the mindset that we try to bring into digital, actually, which is it uses the acronym we use in our retail stores or clubhouses called clip in, which is cycling mentioned number 5. And the key one for me was the N at the end stands for next time. And I think that's something that sometimes gets lost in the cold clinical nature of working from screen, doing stuff on a screen and it being then populated to a load, tens of thousands of other screens coldly and clinically. And it's, it's a bit like a window shopper. If you came to a physical store, you adjust your approach based on how you can read the shopper.
Mm.
And what they say to you, the subconscious cue. Someone might be picking up a jersey, they might pick up 2 jerseys, and they'll be like, you'd know which one they're preferring because they're probably interrogating, auditioning the material. They're playing with a zipper. But they're not going, I like this jersey right now. And yet we have this kind of bluntness or this, I don't know, sometimes a little naive around the idea that we're the only tab that someone has open. And in reality, they've got 3 other tabs, 3 other jerseys from us, 2 pairs of bibs from a competitor, plus Google Shopping. Like, it's much more nuanced than perhaps we assume sometimes. And that, I think the retail analogy, I use that quite heavily. In fact, we have what I call an experience framework, which is basically jobs to be done-esque kind of goals for each of the key steps of a shopping journey. Now, they happen to be tied to pages in some cases. In some cases, they're probably, we try to isolate them from the page, but they are the jobs to be done of a shopper's mindset. And we provide real life examples of what that probably looks and feels like in a clubhouse. Nice. So that if there's a team that maybe isn't as used to thinking about digital as being a customer facing team, they can go, oh, I understand why this is. So a product page, it sets up that expectation of how that product feels when you receive a hoodie, a jersey or whatever, and you put it on for the first time. And so you have to, knowing that someone's going to, their expectation of how that feels is going to be set on a totally different page or a totally different step of the buying journey is super, people find that super useful because it means that you've got to layer on different things in your assets or your copy or your fit. Selling Lycra is quite challenging because it's a compressive fabric. And so, we've gone from kind of high level theory down to materials, but that's the job that people hire our website to do, arguably, and that's how we think about it and use some of those retail analogies, because I think we've lost a little bit of it. Is just I sometimes joke that we do e-retailing, not e-commerce, and that's a deliberate provocation perhaps to try and encourage people to think around, well, how do we know this is working in the real world, and what's how would we does that matter in the digital sphere?
I find when I founded my conversion rate optimization consultancy, I used to sit in workshops. One of the most common phrases in workshops with clients used to be, what would it be like in the real world? Like with boots. I remember when we were going through a navigation redesign with them, it was a case of everybody was thinking using acronyms like information architecture, trying to look at multifaceted navigation, these terms that we've just invented ourselves.
Yep.
But it only takes somebody to say, well, what's it like in a store? Like, can we try it? And I feel like that's the most foundational, human, common sense, aligned way of looking at things. Yet it feels like we've lost that. How do Rapha try and combine those two, the in-store experience and the e-retail experience?
It's really interesting because we're so much of our business is digital. So, over 3/4 of it basically. And so we're kind of the opposite of many retailers in the UK who might have 100 stores and an e-commerce site. I think there's just starting to think about it as a experience, not as a channel, if that makes sense. We have 23 stores around the world, or clubhouses as we call them. And we now start merchandising them similarly, when there's that sounds probably a little bit more basic than it is, but like for the longest time, again, that progress piece is like, okay, what are we naming things? What's the naming, in the stores that we're using? So we're using, I think it was the end of 2021, 22. Time is a blur at the moment.
But the
name, road riding, road and gravel, racing or pro team as we call it, trail or MTB, like we were using all these different terms sort almost interchangeably. And actually, my role, I was like, let's just standardize this, because it's not IA, it is IA, but it's basically wayfinding. It's like, how would you, to your point, you come in and you look around and you go, okay, how do I orientate myself around where the right place to go is? And that is so we've started to make sure that we're just consistent. And it sounds maybe a little bit lowest common denominator and not really aspirational and inspiring, but when you start there, you can make that progress. You can find what works. You can share the learnings because you're using the same taxonomy across everything, and you can go, okay, let's iterate on it.
And in that example, like when we're talking about progress over perfection, did that have a KPI associated with it? Or was that just a case of, no, we're making progress for reasons X, Y, and Z, and we don't need to associate a global metric to it? Or was there a proxy metric associated, if you can remember that far?
Yeah, this was more of a consistency of brand, which I think is a really interesting dynamic, and maybe some people might say dilemma, that we just wanted to be a little bit more incisive. We'd gone from being a very singular focused road racing and cycling brand to this much more expansive range. And for us, it was about giving clarity of articulating the brand as much as it was helping people find the right product. So there was a degree of, we're going to do this and let's just check it doesn't hamper product views, but it's a more qualitative. Does it feel authentic? And are we therefore upholding what people reputationally would come to the brand to discover and expect from us?
It's fascinating. And do you know what? I can't stop thinking about what I called you at the beginning of this chat. I feel like I want to profusely apologize for calling you cynical. I think what I meant by that term is that you feel as though someone who cares so much about clearly cycling, but also how we should be treating the customer. And it feels as though not just that within e-commerce, we're not doing a good enough job with that thing. Why do you think that is the case? What is preventing e-retailers, which is a lovely term, by the way, from caring more for customer? Because everybody talks about it.
I think it's almost a pace of, I don't know, is going with the flow perhaps a little too much. It's about thinking, it's about stepping. It requires you to almost, I said this to my team multiple times, the transition to being truly customer centric is one that requires you to almost turn yourself inside out. You have to let go of all those things that, as we spoke about at the beginning, all those things that, like, as a customer, I know what I want. I know what is right. And it requires you to almost lose that ego and turn yourself inside out. And it's hard because when you're passion driven, it can be, you're like, yeah, but no, but when we find the right audience, or we know the right audience, as you sharpen that continual progress piece, there's that, I can still have the experience of protein, and we know that that's all about performance. So great, I've got that beating heart in my chest that's going great. But in the areas of ambiguity, you're like, well, we know that we've done that hard, we've done the hard miles to figure out this is how we need to think differently about it. And sometimes I think it's just it's a long-term decision, and that's sometimes hard, particularly when there's a squeeze, or the volatility of the last 4 years has shown that you have to be able to respond to so many things so quickly that sometimes you just get knocked off kilter a little bit, and suddenly it becomes a snowball thing that kind of, it requires a deliberate choice to say, actually, how do we think about this slightly differently?
Yeah, I like what you used a word at the beginning of that, which was ego. And I think that snowballed into these other concepts. I have wondered. I actually wrote it down in my book, Nick, and I took it out for fear, for fear of, I don't know, getting lambasted by somebody. I feel like ego is a big driver in preventing and risk and the need to do well and narcissism. That is a big factor within a commercial environment such as e-commerce. I feel like it could prevent people from thinking differently. I feel like it could prevent more care for the customer, because at the end of the day, numbers need to be hit, and the two are not often synonymous with one another. The two can be conflicting. Caring does not mean making more money, and vice versa.
I think perhaps not just ego, I think it requires you to be vulnerable. And I think that's a more important term.
I agree.
Like if you think about this, the amazing TED talk, it takes two people to start a movement. The lone outsider and the first follower. But you've got to be vulnerable to be that first or second person. And in order to effect change, that requires you to be willing to put your head above the parapet, or to put a cycling metaphor on it, go in the brake and and push yourself really hard and hope that risk a puncture, risk mechanical, like these things. Oh, we're way lost beyond two hands now, and that it requires that that vulnerability and being open to that, I guess.
Well, at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday night, you have opened my eyes, and I'm going to go for a long drink. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, like to end your statement of intent?
Oh, not really. No, I think we've covered quite a lot of it. I think there was, I mean, we could talk for forever, but I think that's probably the way to close it, because I think it's about starting. It's about learning. It's like continual learning piece. We have an internal behavior, which is find your own road, we call it. And I think that would be my parting piece that's the mindset that we all kind of need to embrace to keep moving, and not being afraid to be vulnerable and think about the e-retail, or if we were talking person to person, how would we think about it?
I love that. Nick, thank you very much for your wisdom. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
There we have it. Thank you so much for listening. Please do like, subscribe, and share on whatever platform it is that you're listening to on today. This show comes from the team behind Made with Intent, the customer intent platform for retailers. If you are, of course, interested in being more profitable whilst being more personal, then please feel free to check us out at madewithintent.ai. Thanks again for listening and joining us on our mission to change how e-commerce sees, measures, and treats their customers. I've been your host, David Mannheim. Have a great day.